Hey guys, welcome back to CLOWNFISH TV. This is Kneon. I'm going to talk about the comic book industry and give you a daily dose of dismal comic book news. It feels like we're starting to do bad comic book news videos every day, multiple times per day, because we're watching the comic book industry collapse. We're watching it, crumble, implode, whatever terminology you want to use. We're watching retailers attacking other retailers, dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria. It's kind of crazy. So, speaking of crazy, I wanted to bring this article up on The Guardian, right? The Guardian, that some retailers are saying that this is beyond the Great Depression. It's beyond the Great Depression, the comic book industry crisis right now. Have any of these retailers actually lived through the Great Depression? Do they remember? I think it was pretty shitty, if the history books have taught me anything. My grandparents lived through the Great Depression. They told me how shitty the Great Depression was. And look, I'm not trying to minimize anybody's suffering. Obviously, a lot of small businesses are going to be affected. A lot of comic shops are going to be affected. But to, put this on par with the Great Depression, right now, the inability to not be able to sell comic books for a couple of months, or not read comic books, or not be able to make them for a while, I don't think so. Just an opinion. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about other relief funds that are being set up by BINC. Remember BINC, the Book Industry Charitable Foundation? Yeah, they're doing some other stuff now. They're doing some other stuff, and we're going to talk about how it's a really bad look to have retailers eat each other alive. We've been covering that. Of course, this is probably talking about Brian Hibbs, who is very, very salty that he can't open his shops in San Francisco while other people are allowed to sell books in other states like Arizona and Texas. So before we get into the video, please subscribe for more pop culture, news, views, and rants. We've been covering the comic book industry lately. We've been covering the collapse of Hollywood. We've been covering Disney. Unfortunately, a lot of it's really bad news. We're trying to ramp up content on our other channels. We actually do have two other channels. CLOWNFISH TV Gaming, which has been a lot of fun. We're going through Animal Crossing right now. And also CLOWNFISH Animation, which we're going to be ramping up. That is the art and animation channel. And we don't complain over there. This is the complaint channel. So here you go. Anyway, The Guardian. This is beyond the Great Depression. Will comic books survive coronavirus? This is worse than the Great Depression. Oh my God. As Marvel cuts staff and publishers stop selling new titles, artists, shop owners, and writers worry for the future of an industry worth billions. $1 billion. $1 billion. And even that's kind of a stretch. A lot of people are trying to make it out like the comic book industry is much, much bigger than it actually is. We did a video earlier today talking about AT&T missing their revenue goal for the quarter. And they missed it by $2 billion. For the quarter. The comic book industry, the entire comic book industry, generates, I think, less than $1 billion, and that's including all of the publishers, the Marvel and DC backed publishers. That's including crowdfunding, that's including your graphic novels and all of that. Not that it is an insignificant amount of money, but the comic book industry has been shrinking for quite some time. It might be going up in dollars, but in units sold, it's been shrinking. There are no new comic books. Yeah, and actually Marvel, I think I read somewhere that Marvel has been laying off editorial too. It's not just freelancers that are being told pencils down, it's also editorial. Steve Geppi, head of Diamond Comics, which distributes nearly every comic sold in the Anglophone world, or used to, announced that there would be no new comic books sold on the 23rd of March. Because, yeah, Diamond just, folded, man. They folded. Didn't take long. Took, 2 weeks, and they folded. Senior industry figures already knew what was coming. The pandemic had sunk retailers deep into the red. It was the kill shot. The comic book industry was already hurting. Again, they're going to try to rewrite history and say that everything was groovy until this happened. I'm like, if everything was good, the industry wouldn't have collapsed as easily as it did. There would have been cash reserves. There would have been a plan B. There would have been a plan to distribute outside of Diamond. A lot of things could have happened to make sure that comic books got to customers. Because frankly, comic books should not be that dependent on crowds, right? Comic book readers, a lot of them, they get the comics, they go home and they read them by themselves. It's kind of a joke. People are holed up in their basements reading comic books. There's a reason for that, because it's something you can do by yourself. You just have to get the comic books to people. And there never was a plan B. They couldn't pay their bills to Diamond or rent to their landlords because they hadn't made any sales. Product distributed by Diamond and slated for an on-sale date of 1st of April or later will not be shipped to retailers. We know how that went. All right, so here we're going to go again, and we're going to try to prop up the comic book industry. Sales of comics, graphic novels, and collectibles distributed by Diamond were 529 million, a huge number which suggests that a months-long gap between issues of Batman, Captain America, and Spawn, not Spider-Man. Spawn actually beat J.J. Abrams' Spider-Man, Spawn 300. That was pretty cool. It will stretch into tens of millions of dollars in lost revenue. Okay, Diamond is supposedly going to start shipping some books on May 17th, only because they're being pressed into it. The unprecedented situation has encouraged many acts of kindness by individuals and companies. We're going to talk about that too. In solidarity with the shops relying on physical sales, most publishers are not currently selling new comics, and dozens of artists and writers are auctioning off books to benefit others. DC artist Jim Lee is sketching up a superhero pinup every day for 2 months, selling them for thousands on eBay to benefit comic shops. At least Jim Lee is drawing. The comics world is now split between many have-nots and two... Wait a second. The comics world is now split between many have-nots and two very prominent have-alls. DC and Marvel, subdivisions of massively publicly traded corporations Disney and AT&T, worth $192 billion and $224 billion respectively. They're losing money. Disney is not doing well. AT&T did not do as well as they wanted to. They were already going to cut divisions. They missed the mark this quarter. I can almost guarantee they're going to take a damn hard look at DC Comics, and you might only have one have-all. Oh, wait, but Disney's running out of money too. They're running out of money too. They're losing like $38 million a day. $38 million bucks a day. Though Marvel and DC have taken a hit from the pandemic, they're still so big that professionals and retailers look to them not just for guidance, but also relief. Big mistake. Disney and AT&T do not give a shit about the comic book industry. They couldn't have made it any clearer. And this is why you fail. They're not going to give you a handout. They're trying to survive. DC has donated $250,000 to charity for bookshops. We're going to talk about that. And for the first time since the 70s is allowing retailers to return unsold comics. Yeah, because DC, as my mom used to say, they're tits in a ringer. They're in a ringer, right? Because Warner Media, AT&T, they're going to take a look at all their divisions. And they're going to be like, what can we cut? Hey, DC's not selling comic books. Retailers aren't buying comics from DC. Maybe we can cut DC. So they're talking about the other retailers. Again, this is DC dealing with Midtown and was DCBS. And the reason that they're doing that, I believe, is desperation. They have to get material to market, or Papa Warner is going to cut them. Marvel has cut its editorial staff by half, according to a source familiar with the situation. I have heard similar things. A Marvel spokesman said the company would not confirm numbers, but all the staff cut were furloughed, not laid off. Semantics. It looks bad to lay people off. Furlough has become a more acceptable term. The reality is you're not paying these people anymore. You might be paying their health insurance, but you're not paying them a salary anymore. Bleeding Cool, trusted news outlet Bleeding Cool also reports that Marvel has stopped work on at least 20% of its books. I think more than that. So this is coming from Ron Hill, owner of New York shop Jim Hanley's Universe, pretty well-known shop. Says he appreciated some of the gestures, especially those of individuals such as Lee, but overall, he feels upset by the weak response of publishers to the pandemic. Hill and retailers like him don't only need discounts, they need debt relief and recognition that everyone, shops, distributors, and studios, is now in the same boat. The faster that happens, he said, the better off everyone's chance of survival. Not everyone is in the same boat, though. Actually, people who have done an end run around the comic book industry, the gate-kept comic book industry, they're doing pretty okay. Again, knock on wood. It's glass, but it works. It's here. Knock on wood. There are people who have done an end run around the gatekeepers in the comic book industry, around the mainstream, and they're doing okay. They're doing fine. But the comic book industry, it's crabs in a bucket. If one entity is doing better than some of the others, they like to make sure they drag everybody down. And we're going to talk about that in regards to retailers. This is what got me, though. This is beyond 2008. This is beyond the Great Depression, Ron Hill says. I'm just a guy who sells comic books, but I feel like this is true up and down. How are we going to do this? I'm reading that Macy's is going to go out of business and AMC is going to go out of business. Why are we letting these places go out of business? Because they were weak to begin with. You know, they were weak to begin with. Macy's has had problems for a decade or two. AMC has had problems for the last couple of years. They were, again, when this sort of thing happens, it takes out weakened business models. The comic book industry, the direct market, has been weakened for years. If it was strong, it could withstand this very, very easily. If there were multiple distribution channels set up, if there were fallbacks, if there were cash reserves because everybody's making so damn much money because people love the comic books, this would not be a big deal. You just mail the comic books to people. But because the comic book industry is so weak, so fragile, it did collapse after a week or two. But beyond the Great Depression, that's kind of, I mean, it probably feels like it to him because he's the one going through it. He's the one who could potentially lose his shop. But that's really reaching. You can't recreate the feel of a comic book shop on the internet any more than you can a restaurant. It's a new reality, man. I agree. I love arcades. I wish arcades would come back. I spent so much of my childhood in arcades and shopping malls and comic book shops. And guess what? Time moves on whether or not I want it to. And that's really unfortunate. In shops such as Hanley's, Batman rubs elbows with Zorro. We've got R. Crumb. Okay. Here we have a guy that is doing mini comics, such as this Trump book, which I'm sure is selling really, really well. Was this Nice Nurse? Enter the world of death and disaster. Repeal it, replace it, get something great. This must be a big hit, right? That's a 16-page one-off. That did become weirdly lucrative because people are so traumatized, obsessed, whatever with them. It says the artist, the post-pandemic world must have comic shops. It must have comic shops, he feels. I'm loath to predict anything except that we'll get through it. I can't bring myself to predict anything else. I think we will have comic shops. I just think we'll have a lot fewer of them. And I think that the ones that are left will focus on being more profitable. Others are less optimistic. I have to assume the Anglophone comics market is not going to come back in anything like the shape it was in 200 years ago, back in February, wrote author Warren Ellis, who can be a very smart man when he wants to be, in his newsletter on the 12th of April. There's going to be a lot of pain points moving forward. Warren Ellis is basically, he writes comics, but he also works in animation now. Here we have Karen Gillan, writer of The Wicked and the Vine. In terms of the image books I've been doing, we've carried on and making them, and because I'm in a lucky position, I have enough sales that they'll probably find an audience. The question is, does that eventually stop? I don't know. Can you keep drumming up sales year after year? That's like any other business, right? Now we're going to talk about Erica Henderson, who the psychological toll is making it hard to make comics. The first week of social distancing, stay at home continued like normal, said Erica Henderson of Squirrel Girl. I was putting out the same amount of work. It was fine. The next 2 weeks, nothing. I really had a hard time getting anything work-related done. I continued to make comics for my Patreon. Don't do that. Patreon's sinking too. But I think the fact that it wasn't my job made it okay. I wanted to keep making art, but doing my work was impossible. I'm now at that 50 to 75% capacity. Look, I'm not going to belittle that. I'm not going to belittle, because even me, like, look, I've actually been having some weird ass dreams lately. I've been talking to Geeky about that. Like, I've been having dreams about the zombie apocalypse. I've been having dreams about being left out in the desert in the middle of nowhere with like no people, because of all this, because of the social distancing. So even if people don't show it, I think during, the waking hours, sometimes the anxiety about this situation can creep in. It's weird. It's weird as hell. I never thought we would be here. The situation has raised existential questions about the role of comic shops. Most retailers in the U.S. are pure brick and mortar operations. The industry's heavyweights, such as Mile High Comics, have web presences that can feel like you're time traveling back to '98. As Hill from Jim Hanley said, there's a lot of fear that they're going to go ahead and release comics digitally and leave us behind and continue to release comics into the market when we're not able to participate. Well, let's talk about that because that has been a discussion that a lot of retailers are having, and some of them are not very nice about it. I know that some of the people we are friendly with here at Clownfish TV, like Peter Samedi of Alterna Comics, has been getting an enormous amount of shit flung at him because Alterna is bypassing Diamond completely and selling direct to shops and selling direct to consumers themselves. They're not waiting for Diamond. They're just going to go ahead and do it. We have Brian Hibbs, who owns a couple of shops in San Francisco. I think it's Comics Experience. He's been outspoken comic shop expert, I guess. He's got a lot of enemies. He's got a lot of friends. He's got defenders and detractors. Anybody who has strong opinions does. But he's come under fire because he basically had a meltdown, at least from my point of view, because he was not allowed to sell comics in San Francisco, but other people could. And he was taking these people to task. And now we've got another retailer in Texas coming out and saying, politely, let's just, STFU, right? So this is Jen King of Space Cadets in Oak Ridge, North Texas. She posted a comment on Facebook asking for people to be more positive and supportive. This is what she said. She said, something has been bothering me. I feel like instead of being positive, people in our industry, we have so many people being verbally negative. Brian Hibbs. Many of them are verbally shaming other retailers, Brian Hibbs, for doing business completely within the law and following all safety standards. Some of it approaches bullying in its tone, Brian Hibbs. Okay, we need to come together and support each other. Bullying. Thank you for saying that, retailer Jen King. It's Jen King, right? Yes, thank you, Jen King, for saying that, because the same people who are bitching about the comic book industry now and about Diamond now and about some retailers being able to pull ahead and go ahead and sell comics because their states don't have the same restrictions, or they're better equipped to sell comics because they had the foresight to set up a website and do sales that way before this happened. They built the life raft before the boat started to sink. Some of those people have been on the receiving end of these jealous, bitchy, catty bullies for years. We know the drill. If you break rank in the comic book industry, they will tar and feather you. These gatekeepers. See the gate? The gatekeepers, they will tar and feather you. And now we're starting to see it. Now other people that were part of the in crowd are suddenly part of the out crowd, but they're just trying to survive. They're just trying to survive. And anytime you break away from the crabs in the bucket, they try to pull you back in. Again, look at the people doing crowdfunding who are doing very well. Look at the people on YouTube who are doing very well. Look at people like Peter Samedi, who are bypassing Diamond altogether because he saw the writing on the wall a couple of years ago and started to do direct sales. And look at the way he was treated by his peers. Look at all the retailers that wouldn't buy Alterna Comics because there were smear campaigns and whisper campaigns because he wasn't playing the same game everybody else was. You have to think about yourself. You have to think about your own business. That doesn't mean that you tell other people to go suck a peach, right? But if you have to survive and you have the ability to survive, sometimes there's nothing you can do for other people. There's nothing you can do. You can't, let your own self and your own family starve because you can't help somebody else. We need to come together and support each other. We're all over the country and world and are in different states of closure. Because some shops can't be open does not mean that it is not safe and fair for others to be. For those of you able to operate safely and provide for your families and staffs, do that. I was never upset that the rest of the comic industry went on while the world stood still for my shop and so many others for months after Hurricane Harvey. One of the reasons was because we supported each other. Those that could fundraise did. I will forever be grateful for all of those that reached out to offer help. Let's try and focus on what we can do instead of what we can't. This is the comic book industry, though. Look, I'm not trying to be Debbie Downer. I'm not. You know, we worked in comics for like 15 years, and there were some wonderful, wonderful people in comics, some of the best people you have ever met. And there are some really nasty, bitchy, catty people too. And again, when you're in a situation where the resources are scarce, people tend to get really freaking weird because everybody is afraid they're going to miss out. And they know that they're probably going to miss out. They know a lot of these retailers know their shops probably aren't coming back, you know, but you shouldn't punish the people who thought ahead. But again, we saw the same thing with crowdfunding. Before that, we saw the same thing with webcomics. We saw the same thing when some creators jumped ship from the direct market and started doing trade paperbacks and stuff like that, or started to do manga, started getting into other things, animation. The comic book industry is a lot of times superficially nice. You know, as long as you're part of the group, you're part of the family, you're golden. But if you break rank, my God, those tastemakers and those gatekeepers will make your lives miserable. And don't be like that. You know, don't be like that. You're not going to make friends that way. How are you going to make friends? So they go on to talk about the current state of comics. It's this tragedy because the books created now are so much better in so many ways, but they're also largely irrelevant to the wider culture. No, I strongly disagree with that. I think there are some gems here and there, but for the most part, I think there's a lot of shit. The fact that these movies and video games and TV shows have appeal shows that these stories have potential, and we haven't been accessing it because we've had this safe zone. No, the TV shows and the movies and the video games of these characters tend to be more successful because a lot of times the studios want to make money, so they make changes to make money. You know, if it were up to the comic book writers, current year comic book writers, to write the scripts for these movies, oh my God. You know, and we've seen it. We've seen it happen on TV and in animation, and it's nah. And then meanwhile, the Guardian gets in here that the Guardian needs money. Guardian needs money too because the ad revenues absolutely drying up. Now, as far as helping comic books shops, right? Bink. A lot of people have been talking about Bink, the Book Industry Charitable Foundation. They give to comic shops and bookstores, but apparently they have something going on here where they're just giving to comic shops. I have kind of a problem with this because the fund is going to be managed by Bink, right? And if you've heard about Bink, some folks did some digging. I'm not sure who dug it up originally. I found out from our friend Aaron Sparrow, who started looking through the financials, and he said that only like 38 to 40% of the money raised actually goes to stores. And out of those stores, it's split between regular bookstores and comic book shops. So they could be doing all these auctions and everything, and comic shops are only getting like 5 or 10%. You have no idea. But now they have a Forge fund set by Lion Forge. Lion Forge Oni. Remember how they had to merge to survive? Well, apparently they've got some money. They just laid a bunch of people off, so that's probably where they got the money. They came up with $100,000. So they're going to do that. DC kicked in $250,000. So, you know, you can check that out, that Creators for Comics. But I'm like, look, I get this, but this isn't, oh God, this is frustrating. Okay. Everybody knows the comic book industry was hanging by a thread for years. This is open secret, right? Everybody knew we needed to do something else. And I'm not saying don't help, not at all. Please don't take it that way. But I'm also like, okay, fine, we get through this with charitable giving. Does that make the comic book industry any more viable after this thing blows over? And the truth is, I don't think so. I think it basically prolongs the inevitable. I think the comic book industry has to fundamentally change from top to bottom to survive whatever comes next. And there are people that have a leg up in that situation. People that are not dependent on the direct market, are not dependent on physical stores, and sure as hell are not dependent on diamond distribution, which is under the table, sucking its thumb, curl up in the fetal position, leaving shops and publishers to fend for themselves. They say they're still distributing. I don't think they're going to come back in the same capacity that they were in before. But yeah, it just shows where people's heads are at right now, that this is literally the Great Depression. because the comic shops can't sell comic books. Unless you can, and then you're the devil. If you can sell comics, you're the devil because you broke rank. So, I don't know, guys. Interesting times. I'm sure we're going to have a lot more comic book videos before it's all said and done. I am waiting for either Marvel or DC to go tits up. I think it's going to happen within the next month or two. I could be wrong, but things are not good at Disney and Warner Media right now, so we'll see. Gonna wrap it up. Please subscribe for more pop culture news, views, and rants, and we'll talk later. Hey guys, thanks for watching Clownfish TV. Please consider supporting the channel. Go to clownfishsupport.com. That's clownfishsupport.com. And if you want to join our community, go to clownfishtalk.com. That's clownfishtalk.com. Please subscribe, ring the bell for notifications. We will talk to you next time.